Hi, Scribes of the King. I hope that you are online. I hope that all is going well with you. If you are able to join me, we're about to start our teaching on what is a poet worth. So if you're here in the group, jump on with us. Tell me where you're from, what you're doing. I'm really excited about this teaching. I've wanted to do it for a while, but I think it's really, really necessary that we do this teaching. But I want to just give you some background information real quick. I'm going to get right to the point, but I want to tell you what qualifies me to talk about this, because sometimes we do scopes and we do Facebook Lives, and you don't often hear about whether a person can really speak on a particular subject, but I know that I can. I'm going to give you 3 things about me that you may or may not know. One is that the scribal ministry that's entrusted to me began as a result of poetry and spoken word. So before I was anything, I'm sorry about that, but before I was a teacher or teaching scribal ministry, I used to do poetry and spoken word. And this was back in 2000, 2001. So I started out as a street poet. Hi, Chemra from Houston. Glad to have you here and glad you're going to be taking notes. I'm actually in Lawrenceville right now, and I just came from this most awesome massage session that was given to me as a gift. So it kind of happened at the last minute, so I didn't want to miss that opportunity. But anyway, I want to just tell you that my background is in poetry and spoken word. I started off doing poetry back in 2000, 2001 for ministry. I've been a poet all my life. So hello Denise, good to see you. Good to have you join us. And so put where you're from, give me a shout out. I'll mention you. This is informal, but it's going to be fun because I want to have some fun. We're going to probably laugh during this. Hello, Violet. Glad to have you. Hello, Terica. Good to see you. Hi, Simons. Glad to have you all the way from Los Angeles. Wonderful. I started out in poetry by myself, just me and my own poetic desire writing. Hello, Apostle Crystal. And when I came to the Lord, I began really writing a lot of poetry in the night. So eventually I ended up with a group of poets, and we would travel all over Atlanta just doing poetry at cafes and open mics. And really, we didn't stop this until about 2011. I know that's kind of weird. That was 7 years ago when we kind of ended that part of the ministry, but we still had poetry events. So my experience as a poet and spoken word artist is totally rooted in traveling ministry, open mics. What you may not know is this. In the apostolic prophetic community, we were among the first groups in the nation to begin doing poetry and spoken word on a widespread. It's not a weird claim. We have documented this, and we started along the same time as some of the other poetry groups. This was before poets started building collectives and started traveling around the way you see it now. There was a time when people didn't see any profitability in poetry and spoken word, but thanks to some of the rising groups and really popular groups, the tours, there's poetry writing tours now, there's poetry, just for classes and workshop, there's poetry concerts that people are doing, and these things did not exist in the way we have them now 20 years ago. And I'm sharing that just to say there are opportunities for us today as poets that didn't exist 20 years ago, or even during the Harlem Renaissance or other major times. Poetry has been completely redefined in the 21st century. And that should encourage you. That should encourage you a whole lot. So basically, my history is that of a poet and spoken word artist leading a poetry group. We were called the Voices of Christ Prophetic Poetry Team back in 2001 all the way up until 2006, 2007. The group changed because I began teaching heavily and doing a lot of ministry, learning about the Scribe. So the ministry of the Scribe was born out of a poetry ministry. And I thought that was just an interesting thing to share with you. I've traveled and done poetry for money. conferences like women's conferences, youth events. I did a lot of youth events. Kind of weird, but looking at me now that my ministry is not really youth focused. But back then in my evangelism days, we did a whole lot of evangelism and youth conferences with poetry and spoken word and workshops. And on the commercial side of this, or the corporate side, not church related at all, I've worked a lot in the sex trafficking industry. I've worked with a lot of people coming out and healing in those areas. And I found niches for my poetry in that area as well. So I speak a lot into injustice, a lot into healing, the healing side also, and dealing with topics that a lot of poets do that we don't often hear discussed in a congregation or a ministry setting. So that's what qualifies me to talk about this topic. I've traveled all over the United States. By 2006 or 2007, I've been to well over 1,000 venues, ministering at church conferences, even some events that had 10, 15,000 people and attendees. And I have videos of these things. I'm just not one that shares all of that, but I want to give you this information so that you know that it's not coming from a place of just a great idea. One of the main questions that I get in ministry is, I'm a poet. One of my desires is to be able to do more with my poetry than just put it in a book. The other question that comes from this is, when I'm invited to speak, what do I charge? When I'm invited to come to a conference or a ministry, do I even charge a fee? And this is what we're talking about right now without any delay. I have some notes, so you can see my notes here. I've expanded this topic out extensively, so you're going to see a book pretty soon addressing this issue, probably later in the year. So I'm going to write a book just for poets and just for spoken word artists on how to prepare to make money in the midst of your ministry, if that is your desire. If you're one that is traveling or people are inviting you. So for context, I want you to know that I'm not talking about building a business around your poetry. This particular conversation is about, how do I set fees if someone invites me? Or should I set fees if someone invites me? Or if I find myself on a circuit or within an environment in which I'm always being invited to do poetry and spoken word, how do I know what to charge when I'm asked? How do I know what to do? So these things that I'm sharing with you are my personal experiences, things that I've learned, situations that I found myself in that weren't always fair, people that didn't always treat me right. You know, they would prostitute the gift. So we're going to talk about some of these things in the group and the lessons that I've learned from them. But it's going to be on a positive spin. I'm not one to talk about all the bad stuff and not talk about the good. So the lessons that you hear are coming from that place. And I want to encourage you to ask a few questions while we're here. So the first thing that we need to look at is, I'm not going to teach on this, but I want you to know that you need to do this. Number one, if you have a list, get ready to write it down. So if you have a list, you need to assess where you are as a spoken word artist or as a poet. And if you're a poet, we all know what a poet is. A spoken word artist is basically a expressive poet. A poet that puts a lot of acting type things to their poetry. They use the inflection of their voice. They dress the part. They become the poem, and they act out the poem and express it as they're speaking. There's a lot of emotion in it. So think of spoken word that way. When you think of poetry in and of itself, it's mostly defined in an academic sense. And academic poetry can put you to sleep. I appreciate it. I love it. I've written in that area. I have a lot of poetry like that too, but it's different. So I want to talk about both because there are two streams for poets. The first stream is, do you want to be published in audio in the sense of an academic setting? Do you want to be published in a poetry journal? Do you want to be published in a poetry magazine? Because there's money associated with that too that we can talk about. On the other side, there's those that travel for ministry. And I believe that that's what we're getting from most of the people on the call. You're going to want to know, if I'm being invited to a women's conference, a youth retreat, if I am a part of a poetry concert and they have a lot of artists and there's expectation of a financial return, what should I charge? And so these are very realistic questions. I want you to feel okay with answering them. We're not going to be super spiritual and fight over whether or not we should be charging for ministry, because number one thing, everyone has a different calling. Everyone has a different calling and a different purpose. So it's easy to say, I'm not going to charge. But if a person has a calling that will require them to charge, then they need to do that. If someone asks you, what is your fee? You need to be willing to express what your expectations are in the midst of that. So number one, assess where you are as a poet or a spoken word artist. You need to have an accurate picture of where you are and what that particular gift looks like in your life. Are you a beginner who needs a lot of help? Are you a novice in the midst of your calling? Are you a well-renowned, well-known poet? Are you advanced in your understanding? And this is important. You need to make that decision. We could do a whole teaching just on that question. Where are you? Are you at a place? Because if nobody knows you, if you've only written a couple of poems, a couple of spoken word pieces, you haven't performed in a lot of places, you could have been writing for years, but you've never gotten proper feedback or input from anyone outside of your loving church family or your closest friends, then you're going to want to assess where you are. So this is my number one thing with poets. Assess where you are. Are you reading from paper or are you memorizing your poetry? And if you're reading from paper, is it classy? Or are you presenting it without unfolding something? Are you scrolling from your phone? These are things we have to consider, because I would hate to pay somebody to come to an event as a pastor and ask them to do a poem and they're scrolling through their telephone. They're scrolling through their iPad. How are you presenting yourself? Where is your level of professionalism? So you have to assess where you are. Would you pay somebody that's coming to do a poem for you and they're surfing through a itty bitty cell phone that about the size of the palm of their hand? Would you do that? So these are the kinds of things we need to look at in the midst of our ministry. Excellence, absolutely, Apostle Crystal. Excellence is everything. So you want to look at that. The ideal thing for a spoken word artist, if at all possible, is to take the time to memorize your poem or your spoken word piece. But if you're not able to do that and you're one of those people that write endlessly long poems or spoken word pieces, then deliver it with the notebook, something that's presentable and nice or fitting for the group that you're going with. It might work to pull out your little folded piece of paper if you're dealing with a bunch of teenagers. But if you're dealing with professional people, if you're delivering in a corporate arena, corporate businesses, private meetings, things that happen on the corporate side of the world, people still hire poets to present themselves and to do things in those types of environments. So I want to give that to you as a place. And as you consider this, the next thing, number 2, what type of poet or spoken word artist are you? Operating on the ministry circuit is very different from operating in the school system. It's very different from being a poet that does conferences. It's very different from being in a prophetic environment. So you have to figure out as a poet what your audience is. Who are you assigned to? You just can't be some random poet. If you're really going to do this seriously, you have to determine what type of poet are you. I know automatically that I flow between being a poet, writing like Robert Frost and Margaret Walker and Sonia Sanchez, to being a spoken word artist, just like you see with some of these contemporary poets. I'm not going to say their names, but you know who they are. They're very popular and they're very good. So you have to decide what it is that you want to do and how you're going to present yourself. And there's a whole nother teaching. Each of these points I'm giving you will ultimately be a chapter in the book that I'm writing, or a video series that I'm hoping to put together for our online Scribe school, because I realize that these resources do not exist. But my resources are not to compete with anyone, because I couldn't find anyone on the web that answered these questions, but to answer it from the prophetic place, from the prophetic mantle, to answer it from an apostolic position so that people can have resources. What type of poet or spoken word artist are you? Are you one who writes on a specific subject? Is the only thing you deal with is sexual abuse? Is the only thing you deal with domestic violence? Are you writing a broader base? You need to know what the thrust of your writing is about. Or do you have a specific age group that you target? Because that will determine the avenues that open to you for financial return in the midst of your gifting. What is your flow like? What type of audience would like your flow? Because not every audience likes spoken word poetry. So they're not going to want to hear that. Just like some people don't like rap or hip hop. But there are people who love that particular genre. So we need to start thinking about our poetry like we think about music. When we understand how different people love different types of musical tunes and different types of artists, we'll see that same thing come across with those that invite us or would like to invite poets for ministry. So that needs to be a part of determining what type of poet you are and who is actually interested in hearing you beyond your local church, beyond your best friend, beyond your mentor, beyond your family. One of the things that really helped me, and I think this helps all poets, go to a coffee house, get involved in your community, and start doing poetry live. Not only will you gain a lot of experience from that, but you will also gain tremendous experience from watching other poets. You'll be able to assess other poets and also get involved in poetry writing groups and teams in your community if you're able to do it. And if you don't have one, consider forming one. So that's that second point that I want to bring out. Also, I want to share this with you. What is your goal as a poet? This is critical. You're free to ask questions after I finish with this, but I want to challenge you to consider what your goals are. For example, this is not about whether it's right or wrong. I'm just telling you what I've experienced in prophetic ministry with prophetic people. Hello, you guys. I'm glad you're able to join. Good to have you here. But I want to share this with you. I've had poets in the prophetic environment say to me, well, I want to use my gift to create a platform so I can do poetry. I'm just telling you, whether you agree with that or not, that's where people are. They just want a platform to do their poetry and their spoken word. So you have to determine what your goals are. My goal at one time was to raise awareness about hidden sin, especially sexual sin. I wanted to awaken the church, the congregation, to the things that were going on that inside of their congregation that they were not addressing. People with sexual addictions, people with pornography addictions, people who were hiding as child molesters, and that was just the stream that I was in. And so we would do poetry events that would give testimony to people who had come out of, been prey to those areas. And that was the reason why we took our poetry team on the road. We wanted to let pastors know these subjects are real subjects in your congregation. And we called those events Sexposure, shining the light of Christ on secret sin. And the beautiful part about that, we would have poets from all different walks of ministry, and they would give their poetic testimonies or their poetic injections, and we would do like skits and plays surrounding the poems. We did this for years. The last one we held was in 2011 or 2012, but we were known for that in the environment that we were in. So we didn't just do random open mics, but there are some poets that are into random open mics. And why am I bringing this up? Because sometimes there are featured poets. And sometimes featured poets expect a certain amount of money for being featured. So you have those type of opportunities. Sometimes the features are free. So you have to determine what you want to do. My goal with our team was to evangelize the church about the real things going on within the church community, other than, the salvation message. We know that message and how powerful it is. We know that God wants to build character, and we do those things. We know we need leadership training. But what do you do if you don't know that your leaders are dealing with some addictions and some other issues? So our goal was not financial. This is why I'm sharing this with you. So our team's goal was not financial. Most of the poets that I walk with had no financial goals. But get this, as far as their poetry and their gift was concerned. But it got to a point where some of the poets with us wanted to record CDs. They wanted to produce MP3s. So now, even though they're doing it for ministry, they're looking at ways now to use their CDs as a ministry tool. But what does that mean? That means that in order for you to sell, you're now going to have to begin to market yourself in that arena so that you can get invitations and get access to places where you can sell your product, where you can do what is necessary to prepare your ministry. So you have that type of poet. Those that are ministers want to do it for ministry, but know that they have to recoup that money from the CDs that they may make, the MP3s they may release. They still need an income, and more than likely people are going to start inviting them to events that address those topics. So what do? So you need a clear understanding of the type of poet you are and what your goal is as a poet. If your goal is to go from concert to concert, if your goal is to be just like people aspire to be conference speakers, we have to make sure that we get the same context. Some poets desire to be poets who are in conference settings. So I cry out for poets who are misunderstood, because if you can create a platform for yourself to speak, why can't a poet be allowed to do the same thing for their poetic gifts? How is it that we can see how a musician can be paid, but we pay no mind to poets? So this is another reason why we're having this conversation, because I don't want poets to get shafted by those that think that this gift is insignificant in the body. And Shelby said this. She said, sometimes you have to create your own platform by first bringing exposure to a particular topic. Absolutely. And listen, this ministry, everything you hear about Scribe ministry, I had to create that, because nothing existed for me. When you're mocked and you're laughed at and people think your poetry is dumb or that it's too deep or you're being too spiritual, sometimes you have to create your own environment. You have to find people with like-minded ideas, and you have to begin to build together. So one thing that I want to stress is that poets are more likely to have more success if they learn how to work in unity with one another versus I'm a poet and I'm this kind of poet. Hook up with somebody where you can tag team, or where you can be a part of a group with diversity of gifts, so that you don't just have the Robert Frost style poetry going on. You don't just have the rap going on. You don't have so that you can be versatile and people can have a pool of you to choose from. Because I'm telling you, in this day and time, God is still bringing us back to unity, no matter how much you desire to separate yourself into an individual icon. The ministry that God has created will always require people joining together in unity to carry out their ministry. So I want you to please keep in mind, what is your goal? What is your intent? If all you want is to make money and turn this into a business, you need to establish yourself as such. But at the very beginning, I said, assess your skill level. If you are not that great of a writer, if you are just beginning and you have not had any experience speaking as a poet before people, exercise that. Take some classes. Skill will help you. I may share a poem with you later that I wrote. I'm not really that keen on doing that kind of thing, but I probably do it as we close this teaching. Just give you a sense of my poetry style or that kind of thing, or I may do it at a later date. I'm not sure. But there is unity, exactly. There is unity. There is strength in unity, and we have to look at that and be in that place. I want to give you some goals to consider as far as where you are. Are you entrepreneurial in your interest as a poet? Are you advocating for a cause? Are you in it for notoriety and money? Are you speaking as a prophet, which changes the game? Are you saying, I'm a prophet and I'm coming to you in the name of a prophet? Then it's a whole different thing that we have to consider. So I want you to think about this, because not all poets are prophetic in the sense of being sent in the office of a prophet. Poetry can be prophetic, but it doesn't mean you're a prophet. And a lot of people make that mistake thinking that they're prophets. Most poets that I've encountered usually advocate for a cause, or they are operating in the prophetic gift where there is exhortation and where there is comfort and where there is encouragement. Most of them, I'd go as far as to say 90% of them are not prophets. There's a difference when a prophet steps on the scene. And so maybe I should teach on the prophetic poet at some point, and talk about, though, the gift of the poet, the spirit of prophecy that can come upon the poet, as well as the office of the prophet, and then even the apostolic poet, because there is a difference in those gifting. There's an evangelistic poet, an apostolic poet, a pastoral poet, so we have all of those things going on in the midst of poetry. So we're going to do some of that in the group. Other goals include, what are you trying to do? Are you just doing this to sell CDs? So again, what is your goal as a poet? Now, this is the other thing that I want to talk to you about, and then we're going to get into the heart of the teaching. As you go out, what is your intent? What do you want to see happen when you are invited? I'm going to let that question just marinate for a minute as I repeat it. What are you expecting to happen when you go out and you are invited? What is your intent? This is very important, and this is why. For me, when I first started out, I wanted people to know that I was a poet. Exactly. Jacqueline just said that she's a poet to hurting women. Now, that's really, really good. That's really good, because we need to know who we're sent to. So I've talked about these different areas of goals, assessing where you are. When I started out, I was so nervous I could hardly hold my paper straight. So if you're in that stage of going out, you're not ready for people to pay you. You're not ready to ask for money. You have to have a boldness. You have to have a clarity. There are some people who are truly hearing God, but they don't have the skill to write, so they need to go back to school. And this is true for prophetic people. People who aren't prophetic, they get this. But for some reason, prophetic people suffer from a lot of confusion about their gifting and their calling. They don't understand that you can hear God and be a bad writer. They don't realize that, but you can be. So you have to have training, even though. So my phone is trying to pause. So I want to just really tell you, if that happens, I am going to come back on and I am going to reconnect with you if we get dropped. So just look for that in case it happens. So as you travel, I want you to consider these things. I traveled for the purpose of building relationship. I traveled for the purpose of building relationship for a long time, because I knew nobody knew me. I knew that no one really understood prophetic poetry. Remember, I'm talking about almost 20 years ago, calling myself a prophetic poet and going to these places. So I want to make sure that you kind of have that understanding that you need to know what you want to accomplish when you go out. Are you going to the poetry concert because you want to fellowship with other poets? Because generally, just like authors flock together with other authors. Poets tend to congregate with other poets. So we want to be sure that we know our intent. What is your intent? Also, I want to throw out another area. Are you out just for money? Is it just a job for you? Is it just a gig? It should be more than just a gig to you if you're prophetic. But unfortunately, that's just where people are, and we have to meet them there with love, and we have to meet them there with kindness, and we have to meet them there with the intent that they're going to come higher. I cannot tell you the number of poets that only wanted to be superstars in the midst of their poetry and spoken word. I can't. But as they grew, as they learned, as mentorship progressed, their taste began to turn. As they walked deeper into the Lord, they had other intent. Are you connecting because you want to see people healed and delivered and set free? Do you want to see them break loose in the things of God? Are you doing it? Are you going? Are you traveling to expand your opportunities, to make more contacts and to network? That's not a bad reason. People do that all the time. But your intent will determine how you are going to formulate your entire process of earning money. And now this is the thing, and this is where we are now. What should I charge? If your goal is relationship building, sometimes you're not going to charge anything because you just want to be a person that is available to that ministry as you build relationship. But this is the key. It shouldn't be one-sided. If you're reciprocating relationship with someone, then relationship should be reciprocal. It should be reciprocal. Don't cast your gift among people that don't want to help you in return. So as a poet and as a spoken word artist, being invited in and sowing your gift into a ministry, into a business, into an event, nothing is wrong with that. But make sure that if you do, you have an opportunity to promote your ministry, to tell people about who you are, to begin to sell your products there, to have an opportunity to be a part of the community that you're building relationship in. So don't shortchange yourself with ministries that want to build relationship with you. Don't deny the ministry just because they don't have the money. So I want to make sure you are getting this, because the ministry that opens its doors to you and invites you in, especially if you live across the street from the church. Now, I'm going to be real raw and real honest. I have ministry events all the time, and I invite poets, and they will ask me, well, I have to get paid. Well, nobody knows you. Who are you? I have never heard your gift. You don't have a website. You've never published a book. According to you, you're just getting started in ministry. Nobody is aware that you exist, but you want to automatically meet the first person that invites you with a demand for money. Not gonna happen. Pastors, if you are listening, I want to just give you some insight on how to receive a poet as well, because if people can't rightly assess where they are, how can they make a demand for what they need? Now, this is for prophetic people. In the marketplace and people that are building a business, they'll give you a different response. But the most important thing in the scripture is relationship. Relationship. Seek to build relationship with people. Now, that doesn't mean you can't build relationship with people who are paying you. I just want to give you this aspect of it real quick. First of all, if your goal is relationship, approach every ministry opportunity as relationship and make no demands. Make no demands. If someone you know in your congregation is having a women's conference and they're a part of your conference and they're like, oh, I would love for you to come do poetry. A few women are getting together. We're going to be building this and I would love for you to come. They don't mention money. So what do you do if people don't mention money to you, but they invite you to come? So that happens a lot. So poets, that's one thing that ministers do if you're not a minister and you're not a pastor that you need to be aware of. And I want you to have the confidence to be able to say, well, I would love to come. I would love to come. Can you send me more information about your event? If there are paid speakers, if they have 3 speakers and those speakers are getting anywhere from a $750 honorarium to a $2,500 honorarium, they should be giving you an honorarium as well. What that honorarium looks like may be different. Why? Because a speaker is giving 45 minutes minimum to maybe an hour and a half in a presentation. That's different from giving a 5-minute poem. So you don't expect $1,000 for a 5-minute poem. $75 to $50 might be good for you if you are a local pastor. A local poet, a local spoken word artist. You're jumping across the street to get to this event. But if the event has 10,000 people and they're inviting you to be a poet and they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars, you should be in demand and saying, Don't shortchange yourself. I'm going to give you an example. I'm not going to say who the ministry is. Years ago, I spoke at a conference that probably had 4,000 people in attendance. I was asked to do a poetry and spoken word piece. One of the singers that was there was a famous singer, and they were getting an average of $5,000 for every song that they sang. How do I know? Because I helped pass out the checks to the people. I was a part of the group, the staff that was working this event, so I saw the money being exchanged. I'm not going to share any more than that, but there were honorariums that were being given out to people that were in the tens of thousands of dollars. But little old people like me that nobody knew back then, I got nothing. And I was the only poet in the entire event. And I didn't know any better then. I didn't have mentorship. I didn't have leaders. I didn't have people helping me. In that type of situation, when that kind of money is being changed, even a 5-minute poem is worth $800. Just out of honor, just out of respect for the poet, just out of the gift. A 5-minute poem, because you better believe the praise team that was there is getting something. You don't just cast your pearls among swine. Don't let people use you. I'm not calling people swine, but I'm telling you what happens in those environments and giving you some insight on things that you need to consider. If they are paying people these outrageous honorariums, at least they can give you something that can help you because you had to drive to get there. So we've talked about building relationship and letting relationship be the primary border. But remember, in relationship is reciprocal and not one-sided. The second thing we talked about was, what if somebody invites you to a conference and they're paying people honorariums and you're a poet? It's important that you don't see yourself less than. You cannot see yourself less than, because when you see yourself less than, you're putting yourself in a position to not get a dime when you should be getting paid. And I'm not using getting paid in the slang term like, girl, I'm getting paid. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying that there should be honor for your gift in the midst of that environment. There should be honor for it. The third type of situation that I want to put before you is, there are times as a poet, I know I didn't even have gas money to get to the event. So here I am, a young poet, driving a hoopty, trying to get around. I want to go because I need the exposure. I need an opportunity to sell my books and different things like that. They want me to come, but they have not mentioned money. Again, what I want to warn you about, a lot of believers who invite poets won't talk money with you. Sometimes you have to bring that up. I'm going to tell you how to bring that up in a minute. But if you're being invited to an event and you know the minister doesn't have the money or the resources, You can say to them, there is no shame in admitting that you don't have money to get where you're going. Don't let pride prevent you from getting what you need to get there. Because listen to this, at a minimum, they should provide your transportation. If they can't do anything else for you, they should at least give you gas money to return home. If I can't give a person the help that they need, I have really intimate relationships, so super intimate relationships are different. You're always helping each other. But if you're just my buddy, and I met you and we're not intimate, and you just see how great my gift is and you want me to come, at least give me a sandwich. This is Teresa. I'm just talking in my own way. I'm not trying to be great in my teaching. I'm just myself. So give you something to eat. Hello, Roger. Glad to have you here. I want you to be sure that if you're coming to a women's luncheon, you shouldn't have to beg for food. You shouldn't have to figure out how you're going to get back home. No event is worth that. No event is worth you running out of gas on the side of the road. Look, I know how poets are. So I know not everybody has arrived at this place, but most poets that I encounter are in a place where they cannot go anywhere for free. So at a minimum, I've given poets $50. I was like, I can't put you up overnight, but I can do this. And you're living in my city, you're driving down, you're coming an hour away. I can give you enough gas for your trip down here and enough gas for you to fill up your tank another day. That I can do. Exactly. He's right. It applies to any gift. But for the poet, sometimes we're treated less than. So we have to stress these things because you have ministers that don't count poetry as anything compared to a message. But I'm telling you, I've heard some poetry and I've met some poets that make you leave there thinking, I don't even need to hear the sermon. So you don't even need to tell me that a gift cannot be significant. Some poems are so thorough and so prophetic that they can bring breakthrough in such a way that you don't even need the preacher to come up. I know because our team has witnessed it. We have had full-blown altar calls in the midst of our prophetic gatherings. People falling out on the floor under the power of a poem. I'm telling you, when the anointing is present, we have to be aware that these kinds of things take place. So in 1 Corinthians 12, it tells us that there are different administrations of gifts, but the same Spirit. So we got to get that in our hearts. And we got to get that in our hearts. Poets have to get this in their hearts. Now, this is another thing that I want to talk about. So we talked about the minimum of local travel with gas money, minimum of local travel with the people of God being able to give you some sort of honorarium. But get this, even in a local setting, if that local setting is bringing in big name pastors and preachers, this is Teresa talking the way that I talk. If they can afford to fly in 4 different speakers, how dare them give you $50? Now, it's not fair. It's not fair, especially if you are going to be ministering poetry and spoken word twice, 3 or 4 times. At least bless you with $500. At least give you that. So this is what I'm saying. I'm going to give you some guidelines in just a minute concerning how to outline what you should be paid, how to figure that out, and come up with an actual figure that will work for you that is fair. And I'm going to tell you how I came up with this and how the Lord used some things I learned in the academic arena and in the newspaper industry to teach me how to deal with my gift as a poet all those years ago. I don't travel doing poetry anymore. I do it for causes. So nobody invite me to do poetry at their church because I'm not coming. I'm not doing it. But I will, if I'm speaking at a church, I often incorporate my poetry and spoken word in my message. I haven't done that a lot lately, but I generally do that. So that's another way to do it. I always use poetry and spoken word as a segue to the message. I used to do it all the time, but I've kind of gotten away from that. But I don't want you to get stuck in thinking that I only have to use poetry and spoken word for, for a certain clicky type things. So, I hope this is helping. Guys, is this helping? If you have questions, you can ask them in just a minute because I'm going to answer them. I'm going to give you this for local events where you're only going to be speaking for 5 to 7 minutes, where it only takes you 15 to 45 minutes to drive through to. Expect to get at least $50 in your transportation costs. That's reasonable. $50 to $75 in transportation costs. Expect to get an honorarium. It shouldn't hurt them to give you an additional $50. Absolutely, Mashani. Absolutely. It shouldn't. So you should, even for a 5-minute poem, gas and honorarium, $100 is a good place to start. For a 5-minute poem one time, and then if they have lunch, they can honor you with lunch or honor you with dinner that evening. But it shouldn't be where you have to scrape and do all of that to get where you need to go. $25 is not a gift. Please keep that. Don't give any poet $25. That's an insult. That's barely a tank of gas if you're driving an SUV. So just think this. And people do this to ministers, but that's a whole nother story. That requires a separate topic. I especially want to talk to poets on this one. If you are at a conference and that conference has speakers, 2 or 3 speakers that have been flown in and that have been paid, you can automatically guarantee that those plane tickets probably going to average up for 3 speakers to about $1,000, maybe more, $1,500. If those speakers are speaking, if it's a decent ministry and they know how to honor the people of God, but it's a small ministry, the minimum honorarium will probably be about $750. Nobody should invite you in to speak as a pastor and give you anything less than that. That's almost an insult. I mean, I'm just sharing that. I'm just sharing this, but sometimes ministers don't have that kind of money. When I'm in relationship with people, I'll come for free. Just treat me right. Just make sure it's reciprocal. So it's not about the money. I will come and do whatever you need from me for a whole weekend, not for a dime. Just get me there. It happens all the time. The people I mentor, if they have conferences, I come in at my own expense. I don't even expect them to give me anything because I'm their mentor. So I help them. You help them. But they always bless me. They always take care. But that's what relationship is all about. But if you're not in relationship, you got to look at that thing differently. You got to look at it differently. I was in bondage to a minister one time, and every time I had something and invited that minister, they nickeled and dimed me at every turn. I couldn't hardly invite the guests that I wanted because I felt obligated to invite that minister. So there are all kinds of things that play into this. And so I just want to give you some insight. The book, when I write it, is going to be really good, and it's going to be practical. I'm not one of them people that are going to give you what the Lord said and not give you anything practical to apply to it. I hate buying those kinds of books. I really want you to have a book that you can put in your hand, put in the hand of the poet that you are mentoring, that will answer and talk about all of the things that we're talking about now, because I could go on each one of these topics for days. The other thing that you want to be aware of is this. This is the part I'm getting to now, and we're almost at the end. How do I know? How can I begin to set out a plan and assess how I can charge? How can I assess a plan and know what to charge? Listen, people get mad about them online forms that ministers have that speak to how many people are in attendance. Who else is speaking with you? Where is the event being held? I'm going to give you some wisdom behind that. When you answer those questions, where is the event being held? Well, if you're holding your event in a Motel 8, I already know you can't afford to pay me. Now, I'm not being funny. But I'm telling you why some of these questions are on the ministry forms. It's because a lot of ministers have been so mistreated, like myself, and so prostituted by people. I've been to events, preached my heart out, given everything, and got $50 as an honorarium, and I was gone for 3 days. I would never badmouth the minister. But if people do this with pastors, what do you think they're going to do with poets who they think less of anyway? I'm just telling you. What are they going to do with that? So listen to this. On these forms, when you go online right now, go on these forms and look like ministry request forms. Look at the questions they ask you. Please answer the questions. And please create something similar for yourself. I'm going to create forms for you. I'm going to have all of those things available from my experiences as a poet in this area where you can know exactly what to ask. If somebody says to you, this is my response to people. If somebody says, well, what is your fee? What do you charge? If I know they don't want relationship with me and I know that all they want is my gift and that I know I'll never be back, what I'll do is I'll give them a fee. But if it's people that I feel like God is calling me to relationship with, this is what I will say. This is what I normally receive. I receive as an honorarium within this range. But I am interested in building relationship with you. So I'll answer the question like that. So they know my expectation right off the bat. But also they know you ain't going to hand me $200 and I'm going to walk out of here. So we have to have a level of expectation. This is not about pimping and prostitution. But remember, a lot of us, when we go speak, we're leaving our children to a babysitter. I have to leave my son with the babysitter. That's not cheap. My husband sometimes have to take off from work just so I can go out of state to be with somebody. He's losing 3 days of income. I want to put this in a realistic view. So that people were, wow, that sure is a high fee. Not if you don't know that the person you're inviting has a special needs child that requires special care, so you can't get your $15 an hour babysitter. So there are a lot of things that are going on in the background. You have to make sure your expenses are taken care of. Poets, if you are traveling out of town, on that form, make sure if there are multiple speakers, multiple people being presented, and the minister approaches you and say, well, what is your fee? You can say, well, I know that you have other speakers that are attending this conference, and I know that they have honorariums that are expected. So I'm going to ask for an honorarium of $250. Exactly. I'm going to ask for an honorarium, but we haven't gotten to. So you shouldn't have to break even if they already know what to expect before you come. It's different in intimate relationships. Intimate. I have intimate relationships. What do I mean? I don't have to have money from the people that I lead because I'm there to help and serve them. They give me their best, but I'm not going to have them go in debt trying to bring me in. That's what I'm saying. We work together. If I have a need, they help me. If they have a need, I help them, but there's a small group of people. So if you're going, on the bottom line, if you're traveling out of state, even for a 5-minute poem, they need to take care of your hotel. Whatever that is. Not Motel 8, a Quality Inn, a Hampton Inn, something like that is good. They need to make sure you have transportation from the hotel to the location of the conference. You shouldn't be responsible for getting yourself there. They should take care of your meals. I'm telling you that you got to eat. I've been in places and didn't get any food. I'm telling you the truth. Not just as a poet, I'm talking as a pastor. So, you go there and you get these things. You need to have that. Unless you decide I'm building relationship and I'm going at my own expense because this is an awesome opportunity. That's different. Transportation, lodging, and food is not an option. If the event is at night and you're traveling, even in your local community, sometimes I go to events in Atlanta that are 2 hours away. I'll drive home from a 2-hour event, but I'm not driving home from a 3-hour event. Maybe you can let me, especially if the event doesn't end until 11:30 at night. It's unreasonable to send somebody who's ministered with you home late at night. This is just common courtesy and common etiquette. You need to take care of them. So that may be a one-night expense, and you have the right to ask that without looking ridiculous, especially if you are a mature poet, someone who is extremely gifted, someone who has seen mountains move in the midst of their gifting. I'm really speaking to those that are seasoned. If nobody knows you, if you've done one poem and all of that, you can't make those kinds of demands. You can make suggestions, but we all have to pay the cost that's required before we get to where we want to be. So we've all done our free stuff. We've done all of this, and some of us are way past that. I'm not in the free mode anymore. I'm in the relationship mode. I don't play that anymore. That game is over. Game in. But for those that are in that place, I want to encourage you to be realistic. Don't be caught up in who a person is. One of the biggest traps that I ever fell in was thinking that because somebody was well known, they were going to treat me right. I was treated the worst by those people. Exactly. Mashani brought out a point that I made. You always want to make suggestions and not commands, not demands. This is what I suggest an honorarium should be for me. And if that opportunity is lost because you set a standard for yourself, guess what? That's not the only opportunity you will have. That's not the only opportunity you will have. So don't think that you're shutting a door. There's no such thing as a closed door when you're doing ministry. It's closed to that person, but that doesn't mean that there aren't other doors that God is going to open for you. And don't think that just because a person is popular that means the door is going to open wider. I've had doors tighten up because of things like that. So, you have to just kind of go with what the Lord is telling you to do. So when you're going and you're looking at this list, you need to know basic things. Begin to ask people, where is your event being held? What is the vision for your event? This is a big one. I don't like canned poetry at my events. So if you're doing the same poem everywhere you go and expecting the same money, something's wrong with that. If you're going to be a prophetic poet, be a prophetic poet. Or choose something you've written that's not on your circuit that's going to bless the people in their original place, especially if they are paying you. Spend time with the Lord to find out what you need to hear poetically for that particular event, for that particular engagement, for that particular group. Write according to the theme. Do custom, exactly. Only do custom for those kinds of events. You don't want to prostitute the people that are giving you an opportunity. Now, this is the thing. Custom writing, when ministers tell me, now I do this still. I still do this every now and then. I have had pastors call and they say, listen, I'm doing this event on such and such and such. I know that you write a lot into sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, sexual addiction. I know that is your area. Can you write something for me? Now you've asked me for a custom portrait. Would you charge a painter $1 to do a custom portrait of you? Would you charge a musician $1 to do a custom instrumental track for you? No, you would not. So with the same type of mindset, we need to approach poetry and spoken word in the same way. Custom writing is as valuable as a custom painting. It's as valuable as a custom musical composition. Why do we want to dumb down something we don't value and totally mishandle the person? If you're asking for a prophetic gift, you're asking for the word of the Lord. I'm not saying we're prostituting God, but that person has dedicated and labored to produce you their scribal best. So let's have some honor there. So as a poet, you might want to look at saying, do you need a custom written piece, or would you like for me to write something that represents something that I've already written? I'm just telling you the truth. We've got it all. We have to teach people how to treat us. I learned that from my pastor years ago. Custom writing doesn't really work for me. It's not my thing. I'm usually, if somebody is assigned to me and they invite me months in advance, I'll begin to pray. And if that assignment is for me, God will give it to me right away. And so I really want to encourage you in that vein to do that. Now, I do custom writing in other areas, but I'm not so much as writing poetry now as I used to. That used to be a huge thing. But now I'm going to talk to the people about custom, how can I say it? Custom things for weddings, custom things for funerals. I said funerals. Yes, I did. Custom things for special events, ordinations, consecration services, special events for church dedications, special events for ministry launches, special events for these. Now, with these types of services, I'm going to say this. If you are someone that is always called for these type of events, you have a business. I hope you hear me. You have a business. If you find yourself being requested to do weddings, requested for wedding anniversaries, requested for memorials, requested for funerals, requested for a certain stream of conferences, requested for empowerment, requested for exhorting type events, you have a business. You have a business. You have a business. There should be a fee schedule. There should be a fee schedule for birthdays. There should be a fee schedule. $250 should be your one of your beginning points. If you have to put that on a poster, the poster cost goes with it, plus your travel, plus your hotel, plus your expenses. If you're a high demand poet and you're well known, you enter into the thousands. You enter into a significant amount of money. So the more well known you are in poetry and spoken word, and the more gifted you are in that, the higher that you can expect people to charge. Minimum $250, not including expenses. And if they want a plaque or something, they got to pay for it to be on a plaque. They got to pay the shipping costs and everything associated with it. The plaque is not included in your minimum. And so I want to kind of share some of these things. This is where I get some of this from. I'm working in the news and newspaper industry, the publishing industry, the academic industry, being able to have access and see what other people are doing. On average, in some of the most popular poetry journals in the world, a poet doesn't get more than $25 for submitting their fee. However, for submitting their poetry. Let me say that again. In academic arenas, the normal payout for a poem is about $25 in a published book that will sit around for years. One poem. I don't care how long it is or how great it is. The average person will only get $25, $35, $45, $50 for that. That's just regular academic poetry with people that write really well poetry, that have been trained, got Masters of Fine Arts degrees, all of that. They're still not getting more than $25 or $35 for their published work. If you're lucky, some of those poems will garner $250. Secondly, I want to share this with you. For people who are making real money in poetry, they're probably like Maya Angelou was. They're probably like some of the viral poets are on YouTube that are having 17 million hits on their poetry. They're probably like Rupi Kaur, who is a best-selling poet at this time. And so they can garner $10,000 for a poetry presentation. They can do that. But you and I, unless the Lord, and he will, not saying he doesn't, God has blessed me, so I'm not saying that, but the reality is that your expectation has to be in the right place. Poets make money in the publishing industry, those that do, by publishing a lot, not on one poem, publishing a lot of their poetry. So you need to keep those kinds of things in mind. There is really no money in the sense of the poet itself, the poem itself. So this is why your intent is significant. If you're building a business like we talked about before, that's a whole nother arena. If you are a traveling poet, it's probably better to figure out what your goal and intent is, because if you've dedicated your life to fighting sex trafficking, sexual abuse, you've dedicated your life to healing, then more than likely you have a message that you can speak or preach behind that. So you need to also develop the speaker in you. The person that goes out and that talks about the subject matter, that also does the poem, and make it a cause. And make it relevant to what you're doing, and more opportunity will open to you for that, because now you've found a niche. Now you found a place where you can stand and be a voice. And so people who know my poetry and spoken word, they already know that she does poetry about injustice. They already know that and I do secular poetry and prophetic poetry. My secular poetry is prophetic. And I know that's a weird thing to say. That's another teaching. But all prophetic poetry is not thus saith the Lord. God releases prophetic messages that are strategic, that are awakening, that open eyes, and I think I might share one with you before I get off the line today. I want to share one more thing. When you're pricing, you're not in competition with anyone. So if you're not a well-known poet, don't expect to get what Maya Angelou would get. But do set a standard for yourself that you're not taking advantage of. But make sure that you are not shafted. Make sure that you're not speaking before 10,000 people and getting 0. And then driving back home almost out of gas. Don't let that be you. Don't let that be you. So I really want to encourage you today. I know this is a different topic. When I actually outline this in the book form and begin to do a series of teachings, I'm going to go in depth with everything that I have shared with you here, because there is a need for it. And the best place to do this is through people that have walked through this, people who have done it wrong. There's nothing better than being taught by people who got it all wrong and that are now getting it right, because they have wisdom and can see the reward from that. But you don't have to live there. Also, don't live in the fantasy world that poets live in. Poets believe their own hype a lot of time, and that's a real detriment, because if you're not, you need to know if you're not as good as you think you are. And I'm not being funny, but you need to know that. Because if we know that, then we'll know to get better. We'll know how to be better. We'll know that there's still, for every standard that you set for yourself, know that then becomes your floor, that a new standard needs to be established. Don't let your standard become a mantra, as they say. Don't let that standard become your lid or your law that you can't move past. Again, I want to go back to the part where I shared about money, local events, they need to pay for your transportation. If you got to get Uber to get there, then they need to refund your Uber and still give you something for coming. because that Uber may have been a sacrifice for you. Send your ministry sheet out. Find out where the event is being held. Find out who the other speakers are. And you can look at that, find out if there's flights being set. Find out if there are hotels. Because if the minister is not telling you that up front, and all of this money is being exchanged and you're coming for free, you're setting a very low standard for yourself. And you want these questions answered. You want to ask questions like, are you looking for a custom poem? So that you can give them their best. You want to dress the part. You want to look the part. If you have the ability to memorize your poem and to live it out on the stage, do that. Ask in advance if there are opportunities for you in relationship to have a vending table, to promote your event, to share a little bit about yourself, to point people to your website. Ask them if they can put your information in their packets. If it's free, listen, if it's free, look for other ways, because you're not trying to prostitute your gift. You're trying to spread your wings. You're trying to spread your wings. You want other people to know that I can do this for you too. People who invite you for free need to give you opportunities if they can't give you money. And you have to decide. And again, intimate relationship is different. Intimate relationship is intimate. So you already know how that works out. You don't make assumptions. You still ask. You don't demand. You make suggestions. And you do it with grace. And you do it with efficiency. And you do it with order. So I hope that this has encouraged you. And I hope that you've been blessed by it. I want to do more of these. Are there questions? I don't want to end without asking you a question or two. Or seeing if you have a question or two. Absolutely. No prostituting the gift. Spreading wings. A lot of us have been pimped long enough. We don't need it to gravitate to more pimps. We don't need that. But we also want pastors and leaders to understand the perspective of a poet. Because 1 Corinthians 12 tells me that all gifts are valuable. Whether you're baking a cake and flipping the bed sheets on a bed, or whether you are preaching behind a pulpit. We've got to stop, we've got to stop this. The dishonor in this. Of course, a 5-minute poem isn't the same as somebody doing a 3-day conference. And they're teaching all the workshops in the evening sessions. I think the poem can vary sometimes by length for the business. If you are in a business, yes, absolutely. I think it should, because writing in general in a business is based on the number of words. Book publishing, manuscript publishing, all of that is based on the number of words. So if you want a certain poem, and you know it's a poem for your birthday, and you know you follow a format specifically, then yes, it's okay to do that. But if you're doing something at a prophetic conference, a prophetic meeting or something like that, no, you can't charge word count. Word count shouldn't be an issue. Let me see. At some point I sure will, but it'll be more in the line of scribal ministry. The question is, will you ever be offering entrepreneurial business training? I sure will. That's one of the things I'm hoping to build into our online school that will be released. I'm just getting all the classes done because I'm doing most of it by myself. So it's taking a lot of time to get everything up and get it right. But it's an on-demand school where people can go in and take these classes from the prophetic side based on the things that I teach you in the group. So yes, now from the entrepreneur perspective, I want to share with you that prophetic people has to consider this from a different way. So I have a different way of moving when it comes to prophetic work. So I don't use cookie cutters. I just give you foundation and then challenge you to expand into your own unique pattern, because I believe God has a unique pattern for every prophetic ministry and every prophetic business that won't look like the canned classes and canned entrepreneurship that we normally get from people. Let's see. Let me see. I'm going to go back. There was another question, so just give me a minute. I want to pop back up. Oh yeah, I don't teach so much on how to start a business or that kind of thing. I have people that I would be glad to share and do some Facebook Lives on who help with that. But as far as entrepreneurial, as the way we've talked about it today, yes. I help people launch their Scribe ministries. That's something I'm very, very, very good at doing. Helping people build Scribe communities, helping congregations establish Scribe teams within their church. These are things that I specialize in and that I've helped ministries do, whether it's administrative, instructional, or creative. Also, people who have editing businesses, publishing businesses, I can help with those kinds of things as far as the business aspects of it. Yes. So I will love to do that. And I thank you that I hadn't even thought about doing it at that level, but maybe that is a way that I can. You know, I have some people that I mentor that take full advantage of everything in me. And so I'm grateful to God for that, because we reciprocate anointing. I'm helping them, and while I'm helping them, the Lord is showing me what I got on the inside of me. So it really helps to be able to help people selflessly, because you can see their gifts and talents, and you can learn from them as well as you teaching them. Does prices vary on length? We answered that question. Are there any other questions? I'm looking. Are there any other questions? Okay. If there are no other questions, I'm going to end it with this. But if you have additional questions and you want to post them on this thread, please do. This topic is endless. I'm looking at my notes, and I've outlined each topic as a 1-hour teaching. So I'm going to dig deeper into that with workshops and everything. I mean, not workshops, but online courses and everything. So you can breeze through, get the workshops, figure this out, and you don't ever have to be ashamed for being broke and being too embarrassed for people to know it. And everybody starts somewhere. You don't need to be ashamed about, oh, somebody's reminding me of the poem. Oh, my goodness. That is funny. I was trying to get out of doing that. Let's see. I brought one poem with me, and I'm going to read it. You'll take that first page off for me, please, so that I don't have to flip and lose. I wrote this one recently, and it's a poem that I could probably use in an educational setting, a college setting, if I was speaking with a group of college students or anything like that, or high school students. This poem is dealing with the social justice issue. It's probably controversial, but it speaks to my community and the people in my community, and I want to share that with you. It's called Hymn, and it's a spoken word poem. So I'm going to share that with you guys. Okay, I want to make sure that I'm seeing this. Thank you. I have help here, so it's blessing me a whole lot. She remembers him, digging holes in hard patches of dirt, filling her skirt with Georgia clay as she became a wheelbarrow on hot summer days when children used to play. He climbed trees like Tarzan, and she followed behind him, so unlike Jane. Enduring the pain that came between the Barbie doll and the army men war, where she'd raise the bar, insisting that her girls were better than his boys. She remembers him, standing at attention with his chocolate skin encasing toothpick legs and arms long before he could charm the paper off a popsicle. And she was tickled watching him hang upside down in trees as he sees the essence of childhood innocence in his heart. I never thought life could pull us apart, and she often thinks of him. Before adolescent ascension taught them that being chocolate wasn't as sweet as they thought. Before heads that once hung high began believing the lie of inferiority, and her Tarzan stopped climbing trees, and his Jane stopped running to him at the end of the street. He chose the road commonly traveled, and she took the lesser one explored, and her past opened doors, and his closed truth within. Yet she still remembers him. and the sketches on the pavement in the hood next to empty 40s. His name memorialized to the nickname Shorty. And she cries from the Georgia clay days and the ways his big brown eyes spoke of hope instead of dope. And fear of police stops, gun pops, suspicion, intuition, and decisions made a long time ago that led to both of their now. Her now, without him, her slim. And as she dims the lights tonight, she thinks about the plight of chocolate skin that blends into the midnight of despair that seems to take the very air from the lungs of her people as many slims pass by unnoticed. But she knew him, and would give anything to swing with her Tarzan now and bring nations to his knees in understanding how we all got here in the first place. She remembers him. So that's the name of my poem. It's called Him, and that was it. But the spoken word poem is about a young boy I grew up with in in elementary school, middle school, high school. And we were so young and innocent, but he was exposed to the fact that brown wasn't good. And it did something to him, especially understanding that his father was not at home, and he turned to drugs and ended up shot, and all of this stuff going on. And now he's no longer part of my life. He's gone. And so even though society does not understand, it's a very real reality in the culture of some people, especially in the environment where I'm in. And this poem was inspired in light of things that were happening in Chicago and the things that were happening with Sandra Bland and certain things like that. So they inspire me, and I write them exactly as I received them. This wasn't a contrived poem. It came directly to me out of the Spirit the way I wrote it. And the Lord uses it to ignite conversation where conversation is normally closed. So the Lord uses my life to give me access to people that I would not normally have access. And he gives me opportunities to share poetry that may not seem spiritual, but is yet very spiritual by the nature of it calling people into accountability. So that's just an example, and I chose to do a non-super spiritual poem. I write prophecy too, lots of prophecy, but through poetry and spoken word. But I think it's important that we see something different, and that we understand that God wants to change hearts, and he wants to cause us to be compassionate about the plight of people. Regardless of the decisions that they make, something led Slim to that place. And we all have slims in our lives. So that's the purpose of that poem. So thank you. I hope you guys like the poem. I'm in the car, so it's hard to kind of just read it. If you're in Charlotte, North Carolina this weekend, join us. If you know friends who are in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, let them know that we are having our Scribes over the city and the region. I am so looking forward to that meeting. It will be highly prophetic, and people will be sharing their poetry and spoken word. We do everything I'm telling you, the Lord has a structure. We have a structure for this, but it's always prophetic. God bless you. If you have any additional questions, I'm glad that you enjoyed the call, Miss Shani, the Facebook Live, and I'm glad that some of you were able to stay. So, in other words, if you have questions, post them at the end, but I've got to go. God bless you. Bye-bye. Yes, some of them will be streamed. I'm going to do a lot of stuff in the Scribe of Prophets group that you don't even have to pay for. So, and yes, you can still enroll for the writing intensive on March 31st. It's going to be phenomenal. It's a healing intensive. If you're struggling to write your healing story, please come. It's going to be an amazing time. You're going to hear from a lot of poets and their styles, their approaches. There are a lot of writers, there are a lot of playwrights, not a lot of playwrights, but a lot of their work and things like that, so that you can be exposed to what it actually looks like and feels like to write in these venues. But anyway, God bless you, and I will talk to you soon. May the peace and blessings of the Lord, and in Matthew 13:52, scribal anointing overtake you in this season.